Hello, everyone. This is sig-aws. It is August 24th. I am your co-moderator for the day, Justin Santa Barbara. We are recording this, so please be aware of that. The agenda, I will paste it into the Zoom chat, but please do put things on there if you would like to discuss them. We don't have a ton on the agenda, but it's good for the record to have those things. And if we do get stuff on the agenda, it's good to make sure that we get to everything. We have 3 items on there right now. I guess sort of why don't we do the leadership one first, because that should hopefully be fairly straightforward. So there is 2 weeks ago, I believe, Bob. Do you want to jump in here, or?
Yeah, sure. So 2 weeks ago, I nominated. I announced my intention to step back and nominated Nishi to replace me. We had a vote in the meeting whether to gather whether all the attendees were in support of it. They were. Nobody objected. We agreed to post the PR as our public record. There were some subsequent concerns about whether a PR was sort of sufficient notice or not. So we agreed to leave the PR open for public comment for a period of time. My suggestion was that we leave it open from one SIG meeting to the next. And I think we're at that point. So that would be this SIG meeting. So I'm going to request we have a follow-up revote. And we will have voted on it twice. We'll have had public record open for 2 weeks. Plus I've had a, just kind of offline, had a couple of chats with steering committee members who are kind of acknowledging that there aren't actually standards for what constitutes public notice. My position was that, well, like, we do lots of stuff in the open via PRs, and that ought to be adequate. I think there is some project-wide discussion about whether that is indeed adequate or not, but nevertheless, I think we're in totally good shape, having waited as long as we have. So I want to move that we revote on it. What we did last time, by the way, so Chris Nova ran the vote last time. Maybe you should run the vote this time, Justin, just to be super clean about it. But what we did last time was we asked everybody to vote in the chat as well, and either put a +1 or a -1 or whatever. So
that's great. Yeah. So please put a +1 or a -1 or whatever in the chat. If you don't feel comfortable putting a public -1 or +1, then feel free. You can DM me in Zoom, and I will note it and follow up with you. I will say one thing, which is some of the confusion, I think, is probably my fault, I guess, for not having set up a charter where we have a clear procedure to date. And I will endorse Nishi in terms of being very good at this sort of thing from what I have seen of her so far. So I hope that we can get Nishi involved and hopefully set these clear sort of procedures. That will be wonderful.
excellent.
Cool. I don't see any negative votes at the moment, so we can tentatively say that is a thumbs up, and if anything happens before the end of the meeting, then we can revisit. But otherwise, I think we have plenty of consensus and plenty of notice. And there was also a thread on sig-aws mailing list as well, so I think we've covered every possible procedure we can think of.
Great. Now, some things it's best to over communicate on.
Yes, it's also tricky when you do a PR, to know, do you do the PR before you do the mailing list thread, or so there's a sequencing issue, right? So
great.
Anyway, all right, great. I'm glad we got that out of the way. Thank you. Is Nishi here?
Yes, she is. She's
in the room somewhere.
I can see her face.
Yes, I am. Oops.
There we go.
Sorry.
Hey, Nishi. All right, great. Oh, you both muted at the same time there.
I said thank you for the. All right. I said thank you for the double, triple endorsement. It was a really arduous process, but I appreciate it.
Yay. Thanks, Nishi. Yeah, hopefully we can get the charter done and make it more of a streamlined, this is how we do it, and follow our procedure, and everyone sort of on both sides, as it were. It should be easier for all around.
I think we should put pressure on our new leadership to make sure that the charter is sorted out.
But only the new members of the new leadership quorum. But otherwise, I approve that message. Yes. All right. So we have 3 things left on the agenda for today. I'll give a quick. Why don't we do DNS, because it's next on the agenda in the list, and it might be of interest to a lot of people. So there are ongoing discussions generally in Kubernetes about long DNS timeouts, or basically DNS takes a long time to resolve inside the cluster. There are, I think, 3 or 4 like known causes, ranging from UDP packet loss, sort of random UDP packet loss, to IP tables collisions which I think we've had a very good post about this, but basically a bug in the Linux kernel where 2 connections end up, one of them gets dropped because of just bugs in the IP tables implementation, the sort of race. I've started looking at this. Like there's a good like DNS tester program, which I think Thomas Schaff or Thomas Graff, I can't remember which, but posted on. It is relatively easy to reproduce, even on basically on all configurations, even on kubedns. So it's not even a CNI issue. I personally haven't seen the IP tables issue, but what I have seen is that it does seem to be more likely on AWS than on the other cloud on which I am testing. For reasons that aren't yet entirely clear to me. There's also a difference between like COPS on GCP versus GKE. So there's definitely a software component involved, but that's sort of the COPS on AWS versus COPS on GCP. Like the difference is much more noticeable than the COPS on GCP versus GKE. So I think it feels like there's some configuration type issue on AWS, and it's not clear to me whether, to the extent to which it is the UDP reliability versus some software bug versus some configuration issue with the COP setup. I don't know if anyone has any input, but I think in general, the way that people are pursuing this is that we're likely to end up with some form of local node agent so that we can basically avoid UDP packets on the network. And it should sidestep some of the IP tables issues, and it should allow us to do better retry policies as well. So I don't know if anyone else has any knowledge, I guess, particularly on why AWS would behave differently to other clouds or other things like that. So they want to jump in on?
I don't have any knowledge of why it's different, but we definitely came across that. And our solution was to run, a DNS mask or whatever the DNS solution is on every worker, which, like our standard practice on VMs would be to run a local caching DNS server anyways. So that seems like the right default to have. The other thing, there's only so many requests or packets per second you can send to a DNS server in Amazon from a single host. So if you concentrate your DNS servers on a few different workers, the whole cluster is dependent on that threshold. So really, there's a lot of reasons to go with a local agent.
And that makes a ton of sense. I will say that I also see it even with tests that shouldn't even leave the cluster, that are like with internal DNS names. So there is something. There are many layers, right? Like another factor is like if your cloud provider's resolver is throttling you, you'll see failures as well. And we are sending like 6 times more DNS requests at least than you might expect. But
yeah, I would imagine anybody that's got that tries to run a UDP service inside of Kubernetes is going to find some real problems, right? Because it's not specifically a DNS issue. It's just that's really the only common UDP service out there.
Right. And I think I like the DNS mask approach. I think my understanding is that OpenShift runs kubedns effectively as a daemon set, which is like a nice approach for that as well, although like much more resource heavy than just running DNS mask on each node. But anyway, in general, it seems like there is a general Kubernetes-wide initiative, mostly driven by AWS, it seems, or AWS users, to put some form of proxy on each node, which I think will be a good thing. I think that's one of the big last big issues, I guess. Okay, cool. I just wanted to bring that up here in case anyone had any particular info they wanted to share, and thank you, Craig, for sharing your opinion. Next up, Micah, NLB volunteers.
Yeah, just really quick. So I actually haven't had much time, had other priorities shift around to work on some of the target beta work for NLB for this next release. Code freeze is in a little under 2 weeks. So there's a couple, I put the link to the feature ticket, and there's kind of a list of bug fixes and features that we'd like to have added. So if anyone has time and wants to contribute to those, that would be great. Like, let me know, comment on the tickets. Yeah, just kind of a call for help on this if anyone feels they want to contribute.
That's great, and I think there's a particular comment that actually had a list. If I'm correct, right?
Yes.
I will paste. Should I update that link or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can. If you got it handy, you can do it.
In particular, because yeah, there's a great. You got a great comment with like some things that were triaged for 112 and 113, which yeah, I think there's the priority list looks wonderful. A question actually that came up. There's an issue about mapping whether, so currently load balance, if you have a service of type load balancer, there's a hard-coded logic in Kubernetes to exclude the master nodes. Basically, we sort of always did that historically. There was a regression where it stopped working, and some people filed bugs saying that they thought that was a bug, which it was certainly a regression. There's now discussion of whether we should be special casing the master. I think probably we should, but I think there's also a debate about like if you actually put a service of type external traffic policy local or whatever it is, so you put a service, then you put pods on that master node explicitly, whether it should go to this NLB. Correct me if I'm wrong. NLB still doesn't go directly to the pod, does it? It still goes through the normal flow.
Right. That's because the service interface, specifically the load balancer interface, doesn't update services on endpoint changes. It's only on node changes. So with like AWS, the CNI provider, the EKS or the Kubernetes CNI provider, where the IP is in the VPC, that would be really great to have a target type where of IP or of the pod IP, not just the node IP and using kube proxy, but the current interface doesn't allow that. I did see the Google's latest load balancer. I forget what it's specifically called. It's announced recently that has the same sort of thing, but it looks like they'd be using an alternate controller for that. So I don't know if that might be more of a SIG networking discussion to talk about updating that interface, maybe SIG cloud provider, maybe combination. But I think that's definitely something that we could explore.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I was trying to figure out and I don't know if people have opinions about whether we should be sending traffic through the master, but that was an issue that came up, and I wanted to understand where we were in terms of NLP. And to answer your question, my guess is the SIG cloud provider is the right place because as part of the extraction, we have the opportunity to revamp that specifically for AWS, in other words, without, with less coordination at the sort of SIG networking level.
Right. And one other point too, you brought up the point about like sort of masters being targeted. Ideally, like right now, there's also an annotation for excluding specific nodes from load balancer traffic, but that's currently like applies to all load balancers, which is, unless you, again, using target or external traffic policy local, like it's just sort of a very like broad, it's not a fine tool that you get to use. So it would be really nice. I don't know exactly what that would look like, if that's an annotation on nodes for specific, service namespace services to say like this service shouldn't go to this node or not, but it would be great to come up with a solution for routing traffic to specific nodes for specific services.
My guess is that's going to be external traffic policy. Maybe we can leverage external traffic policy local. Maybe we need a new value, but I think that I hope that covers a lot of the use cases, but yeah, it would be great to, I'm going to guess we're going to hammer some of this out in that master issue, because I agree with you, it is a very big hammer to do the node, it's node exclusion, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it would almost be better. Yeah, it felt like to me like that might be the wrong way around, right? In other words, you want to actually opt your masters back in, but anyway, whatever. We can hammer that out on the issue. All right. Is there something else on that?
Just a quick question. So what is the use case that we require to route traffic to the master?
I think.
What are the different?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the use case that was presented was people with a single node Kubernetes cluster, like one machine that is running as the master and running the user workloads. And then because that that particular user had labeled their node and tainted their node as a master, I guess, or maybe they just labeled it as a master, and then obviously then they weren't getting any traffic to that node because it was a master.
So that's only for a test scenario, right? A mini cube-like situation or a test scenario where you're checking something.
Yeah, I mean, I think people can probably, make up other or have other use cases that.
Yeah, because a single node cluster could be still pretty large in terms of CPU and memory, right? Like you can run a large instance single node cluster, like in an arbitrary scenario, obviously, right? Like it doesn't have to be in the cloud.
Yes, I can only think of a scenario where you're running a large database. It's a scale-up, environment, and then that database has a web app attached to it, and you're testing. I don't know how many production scenarios would have this. I just wanted clarity on what other use cases we've seen.
I think there is interest even in like HA type scenarios to bring up 3 nodes, 3 bigger nodes. Like whether this is overall good operational practice or not is certainly debatable, but there's definitely users who are interested in running like 3 nodes and then using those nodes as both a control plane and as workers. So,
yeah, that's right.
So I think it's just really a cost thing. People are trying to cut costs as much as they can in some scenarios. And you're right, it's probably mostly dev test type things, but I think it probably, especially for smaller companies, may not be, right? They may just be trying to squeeze everything they can.
Okay, thank you for that. The other thing that Micah was making a point, I just wanted to highlight. I think Micah was talking about how a service gets routed and then you could actually instantiate a node IP or a pod IP for NLB. Micah, correct me if I understood you wrong, but we were also evaluating the same scenario for ALB, ingress controller implementation. One of the things that I didn't realize when thinking about how a target group resolves, or rather a service name resolves to pods behind that service in an ALB ingress scenario, is it basically searches where the pod is running by looking at all the nodes, and then using node port, the packet is then routed over to the specific pod. So we were thinking of modifying the target group annotation to pod IP as well because of the CNI reason. But then that limits the number of pods, or rather the target group, to the number of pods within the cluster. But if we keep it to node IP, then it actually allows us to have multiple nodes within the cluster, and hence the scale of what an ingress controller can do expands. Micah, does that make sense to you? I didn't realize how this would impact scale, but that was one of the things I found out yesterday.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's basically a call between performance hop versus the scale that we are going to provide within the cluster.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, ALB, just like NLB has the same, right now it's doing the same kube proxy type thing. So it's a trade-off.
Yeah, and so we should, because these concepts are tied to NLB, which is a physical infrastructure, and ALB, which is a physical infrastructure too, we should be clearly communicating to customers what are the scale limits and what are they going with one versus the other, pod IP versus the node IP. Cool, that was just a point. Thanks.
Pod IPs, because there are typically more pods than nodes, you're gonna, like, the load balancers are gonna struggle to have that many endpoints, or I guess I'm just not understanding the scale concern.
Yeah, I'll comment really quick. Yeah, there's definitely scale concerns depending on like the cloud implementation, like how fast a cloud load balancer can react, and how, like, API limits. Like, pods are much more ephemeral. If you have a pod and crash loop back off and keeps flapping or something, then yeah, what are you going to do about, or what's that going to do to the API limits, that kind of thing. It's kind of to be explored. It's more conceptual at this point. Like, there's not been an implementation that's on our side that's done this. So there's a lot of things that need to be figured out.
Awesome. I mean, I think also one of the cool things about splitting out the cloud providers is that we can actually have a better way to experiment with these sort of things, right? So I think that will be an interesting experiment, and have options and see what works and what doesn't. And I think that's why the health check approach for external traffic local is for whatever reason, health checks are expected to change more often, and so that they don't require, we effectively don't have to do an API reprogram on both GCP and on AWS. And so that's why the current mode of reprogramming with external traffic policy local is via health checks rather than explicit reprogramming, which is an interesting approach. It's very clever, I think. But anyway, shall we move on? Seth, you have an item, API for AWS instance type info, CPU, memory, max pods, which, as Ilya pointed out, would be helpful for cluster API, but I think this is indeed the right forum to ask whether there is such an API and where it is, as it were.
Yeah. There's a bunch of projects that actually could use that. The COPS itself, the cluster autoscaler, they all have, like, they're all currently working with either hard-coded information about instance types for CPU, memory, max pods, stuff like that. And others are pulling it from the price API, which is not the greatest place to get that information from. So I was just wondering, if there's a better place or some sort of, solution to that problem.
Oh, so that would be more of a question of an AWS API for getting that information, not so much a Kubernetes API, right?
Or even just a JSON file that's in some sort of repo that all the projects can share in one place to update the information. Because, like, right now, like, when new instances get released, let's say like the R5s or the T3s, we have to go around and update every single sub project to have that information before you can start using it, which can delay it by months.
Yeah, this is something that we've definitely felt this exact pain for. Like you call that specifically the max pods, like ENIs, number of IPs per ENI kind of thing. And this is something that, this is really good feedback that I think we can take to other service teams and try to see if we can come up with something for.
I really like that. That's wonderful. Thank you, Micah. And I really like your suggestion, Seth, that maybe we could just have a shared JSON file in some repo or YAML file,
Yeah, but it could be also defined by the SDK, right?
I'm sorry, by the SDK?
Yeah.
That would be great. And if Amazon if the AWS API can expose that would be, even better, and we can switch to that in future. But as an interim,
Yeah.
I like the idea of a YAML JSON file that we can all parse and use.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking as an API per se, but more of a just a struct in the Go SDK or whatever other SDKs.
Yeah.
Arguably much easier to do than the actual API.
Yeah, the thing about an API call might be just that it's a little like it's updated immediately versus if it was an SDK change, you'd have to wait on everyone to update their SDK to get the most recent information. But yeah, I mean these are all things that can be talked about still.
And I think one of the challenges is that, for example, there was some feedback that maybe the pricing API had some errors in it, and which I don't know the details of. But also, I don't believe the pricing API has CNI, like the number of IP addresses you can map for the AWS VPC CNI provider. Anyway, so it's not sufficient, and there would need, even if we assume there's no errors, we'd still need some manual addition to add that extra information.
Yeah, but that could be calculated from limits, but there is no limits API, right? Because I mean, MaxPod is kind of like, it's very specific to that implementation. I would argue that MaxPod shouldn't have to be a first-class attribute, because it just happens to be the way that the CNI provider works, right?
Yeah, I don't think MaxPod should be, but I think max, whatever the two limits are, max ENI.
IPs and ENIs per IP. That's kind of the thing we'd want to see. I'm curious too. I just would like to know what's the sort of the use case in terms of CPU and memory. Because typically you might have a kubelet that would have, reserved some slice off of that. So, yeah, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean the cluster autoscaler needs that information for scaling from 0. So normally it would pull the information from the live node, but when you want to scale from 0, in order for it to do the scheduling decisions, it needs to know that information beforehand. And I think COPS needs that information as well to set up new nodes.
Yeah, I think COPS needs it we definitely need it for the disks. We need to know what disks to map. And I think we also need to know whether it's of a particular instance type for some other thing, like whether it's an ENA accelerated type or not. I think there's another flag we have to pass depending on the instance type, if I recall correctly. Anyway, I think that'd be wonderful. I really like. I think Robin Percy has a PR to generate the COPS structs today. Maybe we could repurpose that to do a YAML file in a shared repo or something, or a YAML file we can fork or whatever it is, something like that.
Yeah, Justin, can you send me that? Because I'd just like to gather more data about this, specifically if we're looking at, adding an API or bugging someone to add an API for this. It'd be nice to know what kind of information.
Yeah, so another actual use case, I think pretty legit, it'd be if I wanted to expose it through a UI of some sort. So let's say, or like whether it's CLI or an actual GUI, but like if you wanted to ask user to like select some instance types and they don't remember what the instance types are, like what are the actual CPU and memory that those instance types offer, that'd be nice to have that API for that.
I'm also hunting down the PR. I will paste it into chat, Mike, so everyone can see it when I find it. Next up on the agenda, Nishi, you are going to something about action item to raise an issue to move the CSI driver.
Yeah, it was an action item from last time. I raised an issue to request moving the code that we have for CSI driver as a sub-project to sig-aws. So I'd like, so Jan, Hemant, Deep, and our team were working on the code, and we'd like to fix some testing for the code as well, and offer that infrastructure out to all the sub-projects in sig-aws. So I raised the issue. I would like some comment on it, and I'd like to close it as soon as possible so we can continue work on it. I don't know what the process is, but hopefully you can comment, Justin, and help get that issue to closure.
I will certainly take a look.
Essentially, the confusion was CSI drivers today are not maintained really well. And as far as I can see, GCP has a sub-project for CSI driver that they maintain. And OpenStack is the only one that is actually moved all their code under SIG Cloud Provider. So as long as SIG AWS is there and there are sub-projects, I'd like to move the CSI driver there and also provide infrastructure so that we can hook up CI, Travis, for now, and start all our end-to-end testing for every sub-project.
I think that'd be great. I think, it's wonderful to see AWS Inc. step up to to offer those testing things. That's wonderful. I think where is the code? And I think sorry. So two things. Where is the code currently?
It's sitting in the personal repository of Fabio.
Okay. And I think so. If we want to move it under, if we want to create a Kubernetes SIG project, I think there's a semi-official public procedure for that, which is someone proposes it, which you've just done verbally in the SIG meeting, and we discuss the idea of having a new SIG repository. So in this case, it would be Kubernetes SIG's AWS CSI driver, of that nature.
Yeah.
If anyone feels strongly one way or the other that we should or should not do this, the only thing I can possibly think of as a sticking point is whether we want separate repos for the CSI driver, for this CNI driver, for the cloud provider, or whether we want to sort of put them all under one. But I think we're seen to be doing separate repos. So if that's what other people are doing, if that's what GCP is doing, then we should probably do the same thing.
I have another reason why I'd like to do it is because I think AWS testing is completely in shambles upstream. I know COPS has done some good work in taking a portion of the end-to-end tests and make it compatible, but it's not enough. And I think it would make sense to add all the tests for the sub-projects within SIG AWS to start off with. And then we're working with Aaron, Benjamin Elder, Cole Wagner to figure out how to streamline all the CI tools and absorb all these tests into test grid, but that'll take a long time. And so I'd like to have some healthy sub-project testing done within SIG AWS to start with, if that's okay with everyone.
I would hope everyone is on board with more and better testing. But yes, does anyone else have any objections, I guess, to moving the CSI or creating a new Kubernetes SIG repository for the AWS CSI driver? That would be another SIG owned project by this SIG AWS. If you do have an objection, please, or any concerns, then do please speak up. But I think what we normally do at this stage, I'm giving people time to talk. Assuming that no one wants to say anything, then I think we basically do a little proposal to the steering committee, or we should do we're going to end up with a proposal to the steering committee, which states the name of the new repo, who the initial owners are going to be, what it's going to be in there. And so I guess if we pre-circulate that to the SIG AWS list, then people that are not in this meeting will have opportunity to comment, and then we can send it to the steering committee. And I would hope that would be it feels to me like a very natural SIG project for this SIGTO. And especially if it's in someone's personal repo today, I think that will be a good move. Thank you, Nishi.
Thanks, Justin.
All right. Is there anything else? There's nothing else on the agenda. Seth has actually pasted the link to the COPS PR or machine type generator, and I misdistributed it. It was actually Mike explained, so thanks, Mike. And thank you, Seth, for posting it. And I don't know if there's anything else anyone wants to bring up, or everyone gets some time back.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Happy Friday.
Thanks. Bye.